The way lightsaber crystals work has some pretty major differences in Legends and Canon, but what you may not know is that some of those canon ideas originated in Star Wars Legends. First, let's go over some of the broad differences. The most important difference is that in the Disney canon, lightsaber focusing crystals are pretty much exclusively Kyber. There are rare exceptions like colon crystals, but even then they're less powerful and generally meant for specific purposes. The concept of Kyber crystals existed as early as the script of Empire Strikes Back, but it wasn't really officially used in Star Wars media that actually got released in a kind of public-facing way until much later. While the term did make it into Legends, it was essentially used as a catch-all term for lightsaber crystals in general, rather than being a particular brand of especially Force-attuned crystals necessary for lightsaber construction. Some elements of Kyber as a catch-all term for different species of crystals still does exist within canon, particularly in RPG sourcebooks released earlier in the continuities run, and even some of the novels from around there, I believe. But it's still pretty well established, especially by this point, that the crystals used in lightsabers are within a tighter family and are in some way special in and of themselves. You can't just throw in any other type of crystal or focusing glass. Lightsaber construction materials in Legends were somewhat more mundane. There were a variety of crystal types which, in RPG settings, could give your lightsaber different properties, but some of those kind of RPG elements do make their way into narrative storytelling every so often. More commonly, though, narrative stories like novels focused on lightsaber construction materials, particularly the focusing or color crystals, as being more personal to the Jedi, or chosen on a utilitarian basis. A quickly constructed emergency lightsaber could be made with things like glass, and this could focus the same way as what might later be called a Kyber crystal. Well, on the one hand, I do see the reasons for wanting to tie lightsaber construction materials to more mystic, Force-connected elements for thematic reasons. As someone who partially got into Star Wars, at least through the Young Jedi Knights books, I do personally prefer the earlier Legends setup, and I specify earlier because we'll get to that. When the Academy students are building their lightsabers in Young Jedi Knights, component selection involved a lot of personal choices, some of which I'll spoil for you now. Tenel Ka, for example, constructed her hilt out of a rancor tooth, which is an important part of her mother's culture on Dathomir. But then because she was rushing and had somewhat undervalued her lightsaber's importance due to her own athletic skill, she was kind of careless and ended up choosing a flawed lava crystal. This caused her lightsaber to fail during a practice duel with Jacen Solo, and since they were both younger Jedi Knights, they weren't able to control their lightsabers as well, and this ended with her arm on the floor. Once she properly focused on her focusing crystal, she chose to use Galanorian rainbow gems from her Hapen tiara, this time with a much better effect. You may see some YouTube videos which took the name Rainbow Gem and used it to claim she had a rainbow lightsaber, but I've never seen any actual support for this. Her lightsaber was always portrayed as turquoise, and it liked this video and subscribed for more. Early Legends especially also had less association of the color red with the Sith. There were many Jedi, especially in the lead up to the prequels or during their release, who ended up with red lightsabers, including Leia herself. Over time, of course, it was more and more established that red was just for the bad guys, so over time we also saw less and less of the Jedi using red lightsabers. One of the areas where we actually did see a Jedi's red lightsaber survive later on in the time period was actually with Luke Skywalker's red Shoto lightsaber. This was something that he built in one of the very early Marvel comics. It's a shorter version of a lightsaber that he used to fight Lumaya's light whip. He pulls it back out for the same purpose in the 2006 to 2008 series Legacy of the Force. And since it was a lightsaber that already existed, it maintained its color, so we did actually see a Jedi still using a red lightsaber. There was also at least a little bit of a relationship in Legends between color and role within the Jedi, although this was mostly limited to specific periods. This often gets pointed out as just being RPG game mechanics, but there are narrative places which tie color to role. Not super strongly and not super consistently, but it does happen. Yellow, for example, was noted as making the wielder a Jedi Sentinel in Riptide, but this information, even in this context, was said to apply to the Jedi Order in ancient times, around Knights of the Old Republic, where the galaxy canonically was an RPG, so it makes sense there. So if someone tries to tell you lightsaber colors are based on a BuzzFeed quiz about your Jedi role, it's probably mostly wrong, but it's not entirely wrong. Even in more modern times, you have the Temple Guards in the Clone Wars where color definitively denoted role, although this doesn't mesh very well with the information we're about to get from canon. So always keep in mind that how much any given information applies depends on how much or deeply the writer cares to apply it. And this is true for almost any information in either Star Wars continuity, whether Legends or canon. In canon, lightsaber colors being tied to personality was taken a step further in a few directions. Kyber crystals typically start clear and their color shifts based on the Jedi building the lightsaber, so there's still a level of personality involved there, but more metaphysically and less as a result of reasons like Jaina Solo using a synthetic crystal because she liked making stuff. Red Kyber crystals in canon are specifically the result of a process called bleeding, where you turn on a Slipknot album and feed your angst and darkness into the crystal to basically taint it and break it. When Kylo Ren did this, it literally broke the crystal, making it the unstable mess we see in the sequels when he's using his lightsaber. Once this process of bleeding is done, it can be reversed and the lightsabers purified. This is how Ahsoka ends up with her white lightsabers in canon, having taken and purified the crystals from the lightsabers of Imperial Inquisitors. What you may not know though is that while these became the standard for lightsaber function in canon, and appeared in more prominent stories, even making their way into television, these concepts actually originated in the Legends continuity in probably one of the more obscure books that came out. The bleeding aspect isn't taken as far in their original appearance, which is in the novel Riptide by Paul S. Kemp. And the red color of the lightsaber blade being purified there isn't explicitly because of the dark side infusion. Riptide and its predecessor Crosscurrent do rely a lot more on the idea of attunement changing the lightsaber color, something that is more common in canon. So it is still possible that the red color was because of that. In any case, Jedi Master Jaden Korr notes the dark side taint which exists on a lightsaber he takes from an evil clone of Jedi Master Cam Solusar. Crosscurrent and Riptide have some wild stuff going on, don't worry about it. But dark energy being so heavily tied to the personal effects of dark side users isn't really a new concept there either. What was a new concept, at least as far as I've ever been able to find, was that Jaden meditated on the crystal, mentally hunting down the dark impurities and cleansed them. Well, again, we don't know that the red color was a result of the taint in the first place. This cleansing resulted in a pure white crystal, similar to the ones used by Ahsoka and other Kyber purifiers in canon. So it's pretty interesting to me how something that is such a big part of the new canon when it comes to lightsaber lore seems to have originated in this very obscure bit of Legends canon. Where Riptide diverges a bit from these later purifications in canon is that Jaden then attunes the crystal to himself, and this shifts the color to yellow, more like the one he had in his own prior blades, again suggesting that the blade color and attunement are a bigger factor than just the raw materials, as we typically saw in earlier Legends, but much more like we saw lightsaber colors become in the newer canon. So if there's one extra takeaway I do want to add to this, it's that people will often treat canon and Legends as if there's this one moment of a clean break between continuities, and treating those as if each relied on its own set of immutable rules, distinct from the other and consistent within themselves. In practice, rules and lore kind of shifted over time even within Legends, as they also have within canon. And when you're talking about a book like Riptide, released in 2011 as part of the Legends canon, and then Ahsoka, which introduced the idea of lightsaber purification in canon in 2016, you may get more similarities in themes and mechanics than you do between Riptide and other earlier, especially pre-prequel Legends books, like the Young Jedi Knight series. There's certainly different continuities, but there's a lot of shared DNA there, and the mechanics behind stories tend to have their own evolution, independent of the actual narrative consistency. It's the same thing as how Timothy Zahn's books will feel more consistent with each other than they might feel with other works within even the same timeline. You can feel this as a good or bad thing, like in a perfect world, I would of course prefer that things that are supposed to be canon to each other have more consistency. But this has always been a part of how Star Wars is made, and that's why I think it's always something important to keep in mind when making sweeping statements about how Thing X definitively does or does not work in the Star Wars universe, regardless of continuity. Either way, that's how one of the biggest elements of lightsabers in canon was actually introduced in Legends. Thank you for watching, I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you next time.